And thank you all for joining us. Blessed to be with you, and blessings to you and to your family. Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio, to talk a little bit about the latest thing blowing up on Netflix. And this is this documentary on the Central Park Five. Of course, how many of us remember that, where you had this jogger in Central Park beaten? Now they're being portrayed as victims. With us now to discuss, John Purrazzo, author of Betrayal, the Democratic Party's Destruction of America City. Mr. Purrazzo, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be with you. Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about this. This is blowing up, this big Netflix docudrama or series, When They See Us. Your thoughts on it?
Yes, the series was made by Ava DuVernay. She's a film director who tends to have her work focus very heavily on racial issues. And this particular series is the story of how supposedly the criminal justice system did wrong by five supposedly innocent Black and Hispanic teenagers who 30 years ago were involved in a highly publicized case in New York, in Central Park, where a 28-year-old woman who was an investment banker was jogging at night, and she was attacked, brutalized, really to within an inch of her losing her life, and raped and left for dead. And the case made big headlines back then. So the series that the Netflix series that you mentioned is about that, and it's pretty much a rewriting of the history of that case, and making these five individuals appear to be innocent of all the charges against them.
And yet you had some fallout from that. I believe the prosecutor in that case had to resign from a current position or something like that.
Yes, she got a lot of. There's been an awful lot of attacks on her. The series portrays her as someone who was not only overly zealous, but actually a bigot, and the facts of the case really contradict that interpretation. But that is the reading of history that the viewers have seen in this series. That's right. Well,
how do they get away with that? I mean, most of us remember that case. Most of us remember the victim. Most of us remember the convictions. It's odd how you would portray the convicted criminals as victims. I guess, as you would say, it's an indictment on our entire legal system. It's all racist.
Yeah, that is the message. The notion that these people were innocent really rests on the fact that 13 years after that incident occurred, that crime occurred, someone stepped forward. He was a lifelong convicted rapist and murderer who was serving a life sentence, I should say, in prison, or 33 years to life, I believe. And he stepped forward out of the blue, really with no advance warning or notification, and he claimed responsibility for the rape. And DNA tests were conducted, and his DNA did in fact match the DNA that was found in the woman's body that night. So he definitely was a rapist, and he did definitely rape her. Authorities had always known that there was at least one other person who had gotten away, because this was a large group of people who attacked this woman. The problem with the notion that exonerates the other five is that all five of them gave very, very vivid testimony, mostly on videotape and mostly in the presence of their own parents who were sitting beside them. They gave very vivid testimony that they were part of this group that not only kicked and punched and brutalized and stripped the clothing off of this woman and did all sorts of horrible things to her, but that they also attacked 7 or 8 other people in the park that same night. They all gave consistent stories, consistent recounts of those incidents, of those other attacks. They clearly went to the park to cause trouble and to harm people, and the fact that they're being made out to look like innocent victims is simply a rewriting of history.
John Purrazzo joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning. You can catch his book, Betrayal, the Democratic Party's Destruction of American Cities, KIDO Talk Radio. So why would they do this? What would be the motivation to do this? It was fairly, we remember that back when we were kids when this happened. I mean, the facts were just there. I'm just trying to figure out how you can rewrite history to portray these thugs as victims.
Well, what happened is after this individual stepped forward and claimed responsibility, the district attorney in New York vacated the convictions against these 5 individuals, and that set the stage for the 5 people who had. Incidentally, when that person came forward to claim responsibility, 4 of the 5 were already out of prison. One of them was due to be let out soon. But in any event, the DA vacated the convictions against them, and they, in turn, brought a $250 million lawsuit against New York City, claiming malicious prosecution and racial discrimination and things like that. The case languished for a number of years, and then when Bill de Blasio became the mayor of New York in 2014. He settled the case, not for $250 million, but for a smaller amount of $40+ million. And he saw it as a moral obligation, he said, to rectify the fact that these young people had lost important years of their lives in prison for a crime that supposedly they hadn't committed. But in fact, their testimony was absolutely clear. They were there. They participated. They knew exactly the condition the woman was in. They were able to lead investigators to the scene of the crime afterwards. They were able to describe where her injuries were, what types of things were done to her. The testimony was very, very vivid. The filmmaker who made this series tends to look at the world through a racial lens. She's done other works where the racism of the United States that she alleges is pervasive and pretty much never-ending is a common theme in her works.
What's the impact it has on people that, Mr. Prazzo, that don't have the frame of history, the frame of reference of history that you and I have?
I think it's that's a great question. I think it's a horrible effect because people who watch this Netflix series, and the best evidence I've seen of this, I should finish my sentence. People who watch this Netflix series tend to believe it and tend to believe the narrative that it presents. And if you go on the internet and you look at these are available. You can see the videotaped confessions of 4 of these 5 individuals who brutalized this woman. You can see them in their entirety, and if you read the viewer comments below, I would say it's 95 to 100% sympathetic to these individuals. So these people, and many of them say, we were brought here to this particular webpage by the series when they see us. So that's what motivated them to go there. They view the confessions that these individuals made, and they interpret them through the lens of the story that they've just seen on the Netflix series, and they're very sympathetic to these individuals, despite the reality of what they testified to having done.
Boy, that is so troubling because you have people that will watch this series and come away that are, with a distorted view of our criminal justice system. Back to your book, let's talk about how the Democrats and libs destroy big cities.
Oh, well, my book, it's a pamphlet called Betrayal, and the subtitle, The Democratic Party's Destruction of American Cities. What it is about is the fact that if you look at American cities today that are suffering from particularly high crime rates or particularly high poverty rates, they are almost unanimously run by Democrats politically. And in some cases, in many of those cases, the Democrats have been in charge of the cities politically for decades on end, sometimes generations on end. And so it's a pattern that deserves the attention of voters as we prepare to vote in the elections next year. It's important to hold the Democratic Party accountable for the policies that have created these atrocious living conditions.
Well, and they always talk about being the party of tolerance and everything else, except if you disagree with them.
That's right, and they talk about being the party also of what you might call the common man. The policies that they enact and oversee in these cities obviously have had horrible effects on the lives of the common man in these places, and particularly the black and Hispanic common man on whose behalf the Democrats typically claim to speak. No one suffers more from these policies than blacks and Hispanics in the ghettos.
Mr. Prazzo, we appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
All right. We appreciate your great work. Coming up next, does Idaho need to raise the minimum wage? Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Rolling on the right side, coming up, does Idaho need to raise its minimum wage? Tea Party Robert joins us now, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Miller. Always a pleasure to have you on the air in the morning and listen to all of the wonderful people that you have on.
Well, it's a privilege to be on. Now, are you listening on the KIDO Talk Radio app, or are you listening on the radio?
Well, no, I'm listening on the app. The radio doesn't quite come in where I am.
Sure.
But the app is perfect. It comes in wonderful. Just a couple comments. I think that Liberal Steve is full of hops. Doesn't have a clue as to what is going on in the immigration arena. What President Trump is doing with illegals should have been done a long time ago, and I only hope that he can rectify this horrible situation as quickly as possible. You know, it's about time that this country started doing something about the illegal situation that has been changing our society and costing the taxpayers of this country hundreds of millions of dollars every year as more illegal immigrants continue to cross the borders and become more of a burden on our society. Now, we have immigration laws that currently don't work, and the Democrats don't want to fix them because they're looking to change the voting patterns of this country so that it will be much harder for Republicans to retain seats in the House and Senate, as most of the illegals will vote Democrat. If the current influx were to continue and the liberal states continue to issue driver's licenses to illegals, as New York just has done, it will be harder to discern who is a valid voter and who is not. We already have that problem. Just as a footnote to immigration, I've discovered after a few weeks in New Meadows that there is a disproportionate number of non-English speaking immigrants in McCall and New Meadows. So indeed, I do believe the flow has crossed our border and has infiltrated into our northern communities.
Wait a minute. You're saying there are people that aren't speaking English in McCall and New Meadows?
Oh, yeah. You'd be very surprised.
We don't have that down here.
Yeah, well, I ran into it down there, too. You know, if Mayor Vita has to spend $80,000 of tax money to help Boise be kind, he needs to be replaced. And I only pray that he loses the next election, as I do believe he's one of the real problems that we have in the Treasure Valley. You know, I often wonder if Vita and New York Mayor de Blasio aren't brothers of another mother. I'm also very not surprised at the gay pride turnout information that Tess brought forth this morning. As we all know, if there's a Second Amendment rally, the news services will report 30 people showed up, even if 3,000 did. But for the gay pride parade, 3,500 turns into 35,000. So I also
so you're saying you believe Tess saying that there weren't 20,000 people and the Boise police are wrong and the media is wrong and
yeah, I do believe that.
Wow.
I also see they're trying to put through the minimum wage again, as you just were speaking about. You know, these people never learn from their mistakes of others. In places with much larger populations than Idaho, you have to wonder if anyone in politics ever took an economics course. Raising the minimum wage is the fastest way to see low-paying jobs disappear as employers cut the lowest and the least experienced of their staff. We've seen this happen in so many different cities across the country, and the latest one is even Seattle. It just doesn't work. So I'm not sure where we're going with this, but it's not going to help us in any way, shape, or form, at least not economically.
Well, on the other hand, you have people saying Idaho has $7.25 an hour minimum wage. It needs to be raised, and they want to put it to 8, then eventually to 12, and they want the state to do it. Now they're going to have it seems that everybody's having an initiative except the conservatives.
But, Kevin, what happened to the free market? Is it gone? Have we allowed the state to take over the free market? Is that what we're going to do here? Do we have a democratic society or a republic here? I'm just not sure anymore. Because raising the minimum wage is the fastest way to see jobs disappear. And it's also a fastest way to see an economy turn for the worse, not for the better. You know, it's hard enough now for people to make a living, and there are plenty of people out there, especially the younger people in the 16, 17, 18-year-old category, the teenagers that are trying to enter the workplace. So where do they do it? They do it at the low wages. But by and large, the average wage in Idaho is not the $7.25 they keep talking about. It's more like $10. Nobody ever does any research on this. Anyway, I've had my say for the day. I thank you very much for my time again on the air, and I do appreciate it.
I feel like I've gotten a talking to.
Great show, my friend. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'll keep listening and hopefully getting my word in every now and then.
Hopefully. Thank you, sir.
Have a great day.
All right. 580-5436. 580-KIDO. Kevin Miller in the morning. Traffic and weather together. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave.
Citizens Group launching an initiative, Drive, to raise Idaho's minimum wage. Currently, the state's minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. That's among the lowest in the country. The Idaho Press is reporting that while Idaho lawmakers have not raised the minimum wage in a decade, 26 other states have increased theirs in the last 5 years alone. The group, called Idahoans for a Fair Wage, is organizing a signature drive to get an initiative on the ballot which would raise Idaho's minimum wage to $8.75 initially, raising it another $1 a year for the next 2 years. After 4 years, the wage would be set at $12 an hour. After that, increases would be tied to the Consumer Price Index.
There we have it from our friends at Channel 7. Thank you, Mark Johnson, for that one. So here we have an outside group once again saying the state has failed its citizens. It's time to raise the minimum wage. And you see it from two perspectives. If you're a business owner, you're not in favor of this. If you're just getting started in the workplace, if you're working for lower wages, why not raise the minimum wage? Thinking about how many people work right now making the minimum wage, we hear that the market is so competitive that if you go to a retail establishment, okay, I'll do the low-hanging fruit here, the fast food places, they're hiring at $12, $15, $20 an hour. Well, maybe not 20, because we're in an economical boom, if you will. Now, we've seen what has happened when people raise the minimum wage artificially in Seattle and Portland and other places. All of a sudden, you get computers and robots flipping burgers. And you get to do the punch code. And all of a sudden, boom, there's your quarter pounder or Whopper or triple or double or whatever right there waiting for you. Now, if that were the case, then people would be replaced all the time. It's still cheaper to employ people. But raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $8.75, how much of a hamstring would that be to businesses, considering that most of the businesses that call in here say they can't hire people at all because of the free market, because the market continues to demand more and more people. We don't have enough people for jobs that make minimum wage. And really, is it the role of government? Now, on the other hand, I say, how many years has it been since they raised the minimum wage? And I know the Republicans are responsible for this. Well, no one makes the minimum wage, blah, blah, blah. But seriously, it's a place to start. Look at the price of gasoline that has gone up. Look at the price of food that has gone up. Look at the price of everything that has gone up. Why not wages? You can join the conversation next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning, Maggie. And coming up, gas prices in California, they're expected to get higher. Why? I don't know. I don't live in California, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And this shooting at the Toronto Raptors game. Now, I thought that in Canada, they did everything right. I thought in Canada, it was all about gun control, logical, safe, rational gun control, right? How in the world can anybody in Canada get a gun and start firing at the Toronto Raptors victory party? We'll get your reaction to that before Glenn Beck. KIDO Talk Radio, your proud home of Fox News, right here in the Treasure Valley. Joining us live from the White House, John Decker. Mr. Decker, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Kevin. Hope you're doing well today.
Not bad. Really excited about your insight into a couple things. I guess one of the most tenacious press secretaries that we've had in quite some time. A lot of us were surprised that Sarah Sanders decided to call it a day. She's tired of the people of your ilk, just joking here, and going back to the world. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, look, it was a very difficult tenure that Sarah Sanders had. She served almost a full 2 years. She began her tenure in July of 2017, took over from Sean Spicer, and before that she served as Sean's deputy, and I think she did a very good job. I mean, it's a very difficult job being the press secretary in general, and certainly being a press secretary for President Trump. But I thought that she was unflappable. She always defended the president. Some could argue to a fault. And I think that she has a bright future no matter what it is that she decides to do, whether it is elective politics. Whenever I sat across the table from her, Kevin, in her office, just one-on-one, I always thought that I'm sitting across the table from someone who is a future senator from Arkansas, if that is what she's interested in. I think she'd be very good at that. But look, the president has some big shoes to fill, and he's going to take his time before he names a replacement.
John, as someone who has been through so many press secretaries, why do they last? Maybe how long do they last? And it seems that job just has a greater churn than others.
It does. It's a very demanding job. There is burnout that accompanies that particular job. If you get a chance, you or your audience, look at Sean Spicer now when he appears on television, sometimes on Fox News, and then look back at how he looked, when he served as the press secretary. And I think you'd agree that he looks younger and more carefree. It's just a demanding job. Typically, the job is one in which the duration's about 2 years. So Sarah's right about there. And I've worked with 12 different press secretaries. Sarah was my 12th. And, I'm looking forward to working with number 13. Of course, the job's changed quite a bit because there, at least right now, are no longer White House press briefings, which is something that I think is a big requirement of the job. And hopefully the next secretary brings that back.
We'll have to see who that is. John Decker joining us from the White House, KIDO Talk Radio. John from Fox News Radio. Let's go to the headlines here. The New York Times. 4 years ago, Trump was seen as the sideshow. Now he is the show, and the second act launches tonight.
Well, it does. I'll be accompanying the president. I'll be traveling with the president on Air Force One down to Orlando, Kevin, and I'm looking forward to that. It's always a privilege and honor to travel with the president on Air Force One, and it's going to be quite an event. The president will be there, the vice president, Mike Pence, Mrs. Pence, the first lady will be there. It really is a kickoff, and they're expecting 20,000 plus. Every seat will be filled at that arena. And, I don't know. In fact, I'm pretty certain that there's no Democrat now running for president of the 23 that could fill a 20,000-seat arena. And the president knows full well that Florida is a critical state for him in his reelection run. It represents 29 electoral votes, and the president believes, I believe actually, that if the election were held today, he'd win Florida, but a lot can happen between now and November 2020. And so the president is beginning his campaign officially tonight in Orlando, but he's going to be making many more trips to Florida between now and November 2020.
Hard to believe at the end of June, we're talking about the 2020 election, the president making his announcement tonight, and then we have the kickoff of 2 nights of Democratic debates next week, and I'm sure the president, John, will be watching.
Well, I'm sure he'll be watching and tweeting about it, and I'll be watching, and I'm curious. You wonder with this first debate, will anybody go after in a discernible way the front runner, Joe Biden? Will they just focus their attention solely on the person that Democrats are trying to beat, Donald Trump? So I think that's going to be kind of interesting to see that, and to see who emerges as perhaps a foil to Joe Biden on the Democratic side. Will it be one of those progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris or anybody else that is running for the Democratic nomination? I think that's going to be an interesting aspect of watching those 2 nights of debates down in Florida.
Boy, and a lot of people think that it's up to perhaps Elizabeth Warren to steal the show on night one.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. It's going to be interesting to see how each of them approach this. It's a marathon. They have many debates, so it's not just one debate. But you certainly can make a splash with your first introduction to Democratic voters. They're the ones that choose the nominee, and also to the public as a whole, because you can't beat somebody with nobody. And so Democrats need to obviously, pick a standard bearer to go up against President Trump in 2020. I don't know who that's going to be. Right now, the front runner is Joe Biden. But again, Joe Biden can make some slips, and he could lose that front runner status just overnight.
John Decker, enjoy the trip to Florida, a working trip, if you will. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. I look forward to talking to you real soon.
Our great friend, John Decker, we appreciate him. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. So we had this incident involving the Toronto Raptors. Have you heard about it?
I got one question for you. Are you ready? Your 2019 NBA champion, Toronto Raptors.
Three people were arrested in total, 2 on one incident and 1 on another. We've retrieved 2 firearms at this point in time. The investigation is incredibly early at this point in time.
So there we have the sound of confusion, of gunfire, of the police trying to deal with the shooting at the 2019 NBA Championship Rally in Toronto, Canada. Now remember, what do we always hear from the gun grabbers? What do we always hear from the gun grabbers? The United States is the most violent country around. The United States has too many people having too much access to guns to save the old people, the children's, everybody. We need to be like Canada. We need to be like the old Soviet Union. I'm just throwing in the old Soviet Union and restrict people's access to guns. Well, now in Toronto, Canada, we've seen this shooting. It is unfortunate, but it goes to show you that even in a country like Canada, where you have massive amounts of police presence, where you have restrictive gun ownership rules, these things happen. In fact, I believe it was in California recently, you had people very concerned that somebody walked into a Catholic church and started saying, I'm going to shoot everybody. This is not a good place to be. You have some churches here in the Treasure Valley that have said, we have our own security force. We're not going to tell you where they are. We're not going to tell you what they're armed with, but we go out and we train and we prep. Gosh forbid if someone, anyone, comes into our house of worship and has a firearm ready to harm us. Now, again, this goes to show you that the gun-free laws and the zones do not work. And yet you're not going to have people saying in Canada, well, maybe we should arm everybody, right? Think about that at 580-5436. 580-KIDO. When you're talking about keeping bad people away from doing harm to you and your loved ones. When you go to the movies, remember that tragedy, unfortunately, in Colorado, where you had people going to see The Dark Knight, and you had this deranged person firing away at innocent people. We have long maintained in the state of Idaho that you want to protect yourself, you want to protect your family, and armed society is a safe society. Now, again, we'll see how the media portrays this trip, this tragedy in Toronto, Canada. But like I said, this shouldn't happen in Canada. It shouldn't happen anywhere because you've got a sign saying, well, you don't have to worry about it. We're good. The sign will keep away the bad people. The only thing that will keep away the bad people are the good people arming themselves. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. It's so good to hear that music with our beloved president. No, that's what you're not going to hear anywhere else. People embracing the president, getting ready for another run, another 4 years of making America great again. Glenn Beck will have much more on that coming up. Also, Sean Hannity, Lars Larson. As we count down the hours to the president, well, the president announcing he's going to run one more time to save America. Good for him. We'll take your calls on that at 580-5436, 580-KIDO. But we are talking about gun control, and what happened in Canada should pretty much scare the heck out of everybody. Canada has these gun laws that say, well, you can't even look at a gun unless, and then you'll get fined, and then they'll put you in Canadian jail. I don't know if that's like the real jail, but they brag about they're nonviolent people. And sadly, you had some knuckleheads, some criminals, fire shots during the Raptors Victory Day parade. What, 1.2, something like that? Almost the, I don't know if it's 1.2. That's what they're saying. But that's like the entire population of our state, right? Anyway, Congressman Eric Swalwell, if that's how he pronounces his name, so be it. I'm pretty sure it is making gun control the centerpiece of his presidential bid. Surrounded by gun control activists, the representative unveils his comprehensive plan to disarm you. Let's take a listen on KIDO Talk Radio.
We also believe that it is time to ban and buy back every single assault weapon, making sure, first and foremost, no more assault weapons are manufactured in the future, but also with a plan to buy back the 15 million that are in circulation in our communities today.
So here you have it. Hello, is this Amazon Prime? No, it's the government. We're here to buy back your assault weapon. I'm sorry, no one's home. Come back later. We're doing the dishes. So you're in your home hanging out. Could you ever believe that somebody would come in and forcibly buy back your firearms, buy back something that they call an assault weapon? What would that be, an assault weapon? Like I said, the Democrats, if elected, this will be their big issue. Even if they're not elected, expect it to be a big topic next week during the debates, the 2 nights of debates, because we can't get one night just doesn't do them justice.
We're here to beat the NRA because we think there's an opportunity now, a moment in this country to actually end gun violence and seize the momentum in Congress with a new majority, but it's going to take a president that makes it a top priority.
And he's just the man. By the way, join the conversation now, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. So they want to beat the NRA. You ever notice whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's Elizabeth Warren, I don't know about Crazy Bernie, but they always talk about that the NRA is the bad person. Gun owners of America, they're the bad people. So we're going to have red flag laws, which means essentially that if you think your coworker is kind of you can call the police and they can come in and confiscate their weapons. That's their idea of reducing gun violence. What about we're going to beat the criminals? We're going to disarm the people that are the bad people. Why don't we do that, Congressman?
We are standing outside of the NRA headquarters to say enough is enough. We have a plan to end gun violence. This issue is not about the NRA, but they're in the way.
Well, wait a minute. He just said he wants to beat the NRA, but he wants to get along with the NRA, right? I don't know. It's all very confusing to me. So when you're in a store, when you're at church, wherever you are, at a restaurant, does it really unnerve you when you see somebody carrying a weapon? Now, people, when they first move here from Washington, Oregon, or California, they might get a little nervous, or those that migrate east of, from east of the Great River. But in Idaho, we rely on individual liberty, personal responsibility to keep us safe. And let's hope that and pray that we never have to use those things, right? We may watch and admire the tough guys in movies, but far be it that we never want to use deadly force. What I'm saying is individuals should have the option to be able to protect themselves, and obviously the Democrats don't want that to happen, right? If that were the case, if laws would protect us, you wouldn't have the shootings that happen throughout the world. In fact, would you have more respect for the congressman if he went to one of the nastiest, meanest neighborhoods in Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, New York City, and made the same speech, trying to get the guns off the streets held illegally by the criminals? Now that would be something, wouldn't it? KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Phone numbers 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Let's go quickly to Denny in Meridian. Denny, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the whole gun grabbing, NRA being the bad people, and I find it a little ironic that the Democrats have made these gun-free zones and everything else, and as far as I'm concerned, everywhere you have a gun-free zone, about 90% of the assaults take place in gun-free zones, and I mean, in America, it's constitutional, and these politicians that sign up and swear on an oath and all that stuff, it's based on the Constitution, and it never was a problem until they started making the gun-free zones and making it easy. They just, I don't know. People know where to go to shoot because they're not going to have, any resistance. And I don't know. It doesn't. I can't believe that ain't more of a topic. And I'm embarrassed for them, to be honest with you.
Well, and if they want to have the guts and they want to take on gun violence, why not go to Chicago? Why don't go to the places where even the police, they'll admit they won't go because it's too dangerous?
Or Canada.
Right.
Go someplace and be a politician somewhere where you think you're okay, but because there's crazy people.
Well,
there's crazy people, and they do bad things. And usually isn't NRA members. Obviously, responsible gun owners don't do that. It's some person. And I'll be honest with you, Kevin. When you've got somebody that goes into a shooting situation, they're ready to take other lives. The only good story in that is another person with a gun. That's what stops them. And it doesn't break my heart this sounds sadistic, but if they get caught in the act and they're shooting and killing people and they get shot and killed themselves, I tell you what, I'm sorry for the person, but I don't want to feed them and clothe them and house them and everything else. Whatever the excuse is, medication, depression, political, whatever their reason is, they're sane enough to go to a gun-free zone to do their shooting. They don't go somewhere where they're going to, run into armed individuals that are going to resist them.
No, good thoughts, Denny. And like I said, instead of vilifying the NRA, maybe they should vilify the bad people.
Right, and then making the shooter the victim. Right. I'm so sick and tired of that. They go and people do crazy. And you was talking earlier about them girls, that gal got brutalized by those guys, and they got off from it and everything else. It's just amazing to me that how the law works. They keep making the criminals the victims and the police the criminal, and I don't know. I just don't know what their motives are or how they think. I just don't understand how they keep getting away with their ignorance.
Well, that's the good news about President Trump being here. He's at least trying to hold them accountable.
Thank goodness. I'll tell you what. And another thing I was thinking about, I keep seeing these things with these homeless people, and just real briefly, how much is the cost of porta potties and military tents to give these people back their dignity? I mean, by the time they go in and clean up the messes that they're making and sleeping on the streets and hurting business owners, why don't they just put in some porta potties and some military tents and